All right, today we are talking about family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. If you are a family man with a business, then you're going to want to listen to this conversation. My guest today is Jon Vroman. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. Jon Corcoran here. I'm the host of the show. You know, if you've listened before, you've heard we've had great guests on here. This episode's going to be a little bit of a departure from that because we're going to talk a lot about fatherhood, which is something that is very important to me as a father of 4 kids. And my guest here is an absolute expert, or he probably wouldn't call himself an expert in it. He'd probably call himself more of a practitioner in being a father and trying to constantly get better at being a father. My guest, his name is Jon Vroman, and he is the founder of Front Row Dads. It's a community of, as I said in the intro, family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. It's a community of dads that also have businesses and that are interested in getting better in everything that they do, from personal to spiritual to family to relationship with their spouse. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about it at rise25.com. All right, Jon, so excited to have you here today. I've been a member of this community for a while. Big shout out to Eric Farewell, who's a member of your community, who was a guest back on this show. And that interview worked so well that he sold me on joining your community. So I've been a member since the next enrollment came through. But I want to dive in this interview and hear more about the backstory behind the creation of this community, because it is so hard to build a thriving community that kind of lives on, that has its own energy behind it. And I'm sure you put a lot of energy into making that happen. But let's start with one of your first entrepreneurial endeavors, which you were a military brat, moved around. And you actually did paper routes and you did lawn mowing businesses as a kid. What was that like, first of all, showing up a new community and then trying to go around and sell, neighbors on lawn mowing and services like that?
I think moving has its obvious challenges. Being the new kid out of school, getting to know the area, making new friends comes with all the obvious challenges that you would guess. But what was really great about it, and I remember feeling this at that time, was that I could reinvent myself when I moved also. Nobody knew who I was. Any mistake I made in the past kind of stayed in that old city. And I enjoyed what that meant to have a new version of Jon show up. I think that was my first kind of hook, and where I fell in love with growth and knowing that yesterday didn't equal tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that's a gift. It really is. And you get exposed to so many different types of people. There's a benefit of having the same friends from kindergarten, through high school. There's a depth to that, but there's also a breadth to having many friends and seeing many different parts of the world. And so there's clearly, there's good in all of it. And I just found a lot of good in that experience. And I also really wanted to be good for my dad. I wanted to be, I've got a people pleaser side of me. I've got to wrestle that down sometimes, but I really wanted to be somebody that was easy for my dad. I didn't want to be difficult. He'd say, "Hey, it's time to move." And I'm like, "Cool, let's do it, Dad." I really wanted to be his partner in that process. So it was good for me.
It's, I look back on it and I'm so grateful for me, because I have a similar type of story where we moved basically every 2 to 3 years, when kind of those critical elementary years. And I remember what it was like to move in the middle of a school year. I can visualize me with like a principal walking into a new classroom, introducing me to all these kids that have been in school together for years and years. No one wanted to let me into their friend group. In retrospect now, I'm super grateful for that experience, even though it was super hard and painful in the moment to do that. I'm sure you would agree with that type of experience.
Yeah, there's no doubt that, also part of the story for me as I got a little older was I wasn't growing. I was really short. I wasn't even 5 feet when I went into high school. I was barely 100 pounds, and I wasn't. I remember walking into high school for the first time, and a teacher stopped me and told me the junior high was, across the street.
Oh man!
So it was there was a lot of feelings that I had, a feeling invisible or like I wasn't enough. I wasn't tall enough. I wasn't big enough. Not only in my physical being, but in my spiritual being, in my mindset. But what that gave me was a lot of empathy, gave me a lot of compassion. I became very interested in the underdog and wanting to see people succeed, feel loved, feel seen, which still shows up for me to this very day. It makes me a better dad, makes me a better friend, much better listener when I'm with people, because if you don't feel listened to, you can do two things with that. You can replicate it and carry the trauma forward, and or you can heal that trauma and do something different with it. So life's either a warning or example, as we know, and that's, there was a little bit of both for me.
Now, given what you just said, this sounds like a bit of a departure, but 16-year-old Jon suddenly became a pool hustler. You found a local pool hall.
It's actually quite fitting, yeah.
Your 4'11" frame walked in, probably
that's exactly
they're thinking
right.
like this 10-year-old, I'm going to take his money, threw $50 down on the table. What was that like? Dude,
not only did that 4'10" kid walk into that pool hall, but when they walked in, the owner of the pool hall would get on the mic and he's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, the kid has entered the building." And I would walk in, and my license plate said Jon the Kid. The guys at the pool hall nicknamed me. And what they would do is, so I looked so young. I looked like I was 11, right? Mm-hmm. And people and I was a very good pool player. I mean, I was playing hours every day, 7 days a week. And I could hang with anybody in that pool hall. I mean, I was playing professional pool players when they were coming through, and the guys would bet on me. They would say, I got money on Jon. And they would, other guys who, be like, there's no way this 10-year-old's going to take me down. What is he doing in this pool hall anyway? And it was a lot of fun. And so remember,
it wasn't a secret. It wasn't like a true hustle. Like it wasn't
there were moments like what I just described. And then there were moments when, I mean, listen, it's more fun to say you were hustling people in pool.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the movie The Hustler, and then The Color of Money with Tom Cruise. And there was always like a bit of a romantic part of like what that looked like. And I did play around with the idea of what did it mean? Like you sandbag a couple shots and then you play better later. And but most of my pool playing, and where I made money doing that was straight up gambling, betting on the game. You knew I'm good. I know you're good. We sometimes spot each other balls like, hey, I'm better than you. I'll give you the 7-8, in a game of 9-ball or something. And then you play for what at the time for me felt like a lot of money as a 16-year-old, $20 a game. But you could walk out with $240 in your pocket after playing pool for 2 or 3 hours. And as a kid,
which you're enjoying anyways.
That was solid. Yeah.
I mean, I interviewed a guy the other day that funded his college education through playing online poker. So, there's lots of budding entrepreneurs that take that route, or they use it to fund their expenses early on. What drew you to leadership? You've done coaching, you've done leadership. You ended up getting involved in the Cutco world. Which for those who don't know is these amazing knife company. Well, you tell us about what the Cutco world is like. It is
really a remarkable company. It sounds kind of funny when you first hear about it. I mean, when I heard about it, my buddy's mom saw a sign on the side of the road when I was 18. She came home and he said, "Oh, that's probably some scam." And I said, "That sounds like a lot of money. I'm going to go check it out." Went to the interview.
They advertising people to come apply for a job.
Yeah, there was literally a sign that said something like $18 an hour or per presentation or whatever the sign said. Who knows? It was my buddy's mom who said it, but it felt like a lot of money, whatever they had advertised. I went in, I did the interview, and I knew enough to know the product was impressive.
Okay. Other than hustling people in a pool hall, had you done anything that was approaching sales at this point?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
outside of selling the neighbor on why I needed to cut their lawn,
Okay.
something simple like that. And maybe selling a couple baseball cards here and there, but
Okay.
nothing too significant. This was my real exposure to sales. And I started with that company, and then I quit for the summer because I wanted to go surf at the beach. And ultimately at the end of the summer, I thought I gave up something really good there. And I went back, asked if I could continue selling Cutco. And my manager at the time, Rich, said, yeah, if you sell $10,000 of Cutco in the next 10 weeks, you can be back on the team. So I did. I sold $10,000 in 10 weeks. I had a goal. I enjoyed the flexible part of that, like set my own schedule, create my own destiny. That felt really good to me. And then it was just, I was off to the races, because what I fell in love with, man, was this team personal growth. We're all together on a Wednesday night for a team meeting. And a lot of my gatherings with people before that were unhealthy parties. I knew enough to know that I was not heading in the right direction with some of my peers. And with this group, they were all reading books and talking about how to manage their time and set goals. And it felt difficult, but positive. And that became a 14-year career with that company. I ended up opening up an office and multiple offices. And then I became what my title was, the North American Sales Promotion Manager. And that was a fancy way of saying that I was in charge of all the conferences and the incentives for what was really hundreds of offices, tens of thousands of sales reps all over North America. And I had the best job ever, man. I was creating these incentives to motivate people to achieve their goals. And I was standing on stages. I mean, I was at 19, 20 years old. I was standing in front of 2,000 students at a time, giving speeches. And so my exposure to this world of a bunch of go get 'em kids, young adults it was so transformational for me. And then I got one more thing that I don't think you know this, but at one point I had won an award that the group that I was with, the region that I was with, they gave out this award called the Dr. Stephen Renner Memorial Award. It was a guy who literally sold Cutco through med school, and he wanted to graduate with no debt and a vet. So he wanted to pay for medical school selling Cutco and have a Corvette, and he did. And then he died tragically in a car accident. And he was such a loved human in Cutco world that they created an award for the person that demonstrated the most personal growth over the course of a year. So it wasn't based on sales. It wasn't based on any of that. And I won that award. And I'll tell you, man, that was a very important day for me, because I remember the tears. I remember the emotion of being recognized for transformation. And I think I was hooked. And from that point forward, anything I did was about helping individuals transform into the best version of themselves. And that has now shown up in many, many different ways, but it's kind of a key part of the story.
So I've interviewed Hal Elrod and a bunch of other people that have sold Cutco. So I know a little bit of the inside of the world, but to me, it seems, if I think back of myself at 18, 19 years old, one, I don't think I would have had the discipline to actually, go out and do it. It seems so challenging. Like,
it's so hard. Yes, it is
so hard, right?
It's so hard.
I was involved in politics, so I knocked on doors for candidates, which that's hard too. Yeah, I didn't do it for 8 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week. That seems crazy. What do you think enabled you to excel in that world, that cutthroat world?
Yeah, you're right, man. There are some incredible people that have come up through Cutco and that I'm still friends with to this day. People that are in our group, in Front Row Dads, Justin Donald, who is one who's top manager. Hal, as you mentioned, another buddy, John Berghoff, whose company is called Exchange. He's one of the largest training companies in the world for facilitators and large group conversation. Remarkable humans. Jon Vroman, who wrote the book Giftology, all Cutco people.
I've interviewed him as well. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, really, really phenomenal. And I think that what happens is that, there's probably a natural element where you go, oh, that person might be extroverted, or they have this particular skill that they were either born with, or that maybe it was cultivated with their parents. But a lot of it is the group. It's a lot of it is kind of fate by who is your manager and who did you meet and who is your buddy in your training class. And, and maybe it was an encouraging customer along the way. I think that as I get older, and I'm now 48, I really do think it's a yes and in almost every situation. Yes, there's some natural fit for the human that's in it. But the other one is sometimes just if you're lucky enough to be in a conversation with the right person at the right time, it may mean that this is your path through Cutco. But whatever it is, there are tens of thousands that come through the door and give it a shot, and it's not for everybody. But the people who really succeeded and figured out a few things, how to manage their time, how to set goals, how to talk with customers, we all became really tight. And then that group has stayed friends for a long, long time.
Now it doesn't seem like a leap of logic that you would eventually find your path to Tony Robbins, kind of the guru, the dean of personal development. How did you discover Tony, and you actually ended up kind of becoming a leader in helping to grow that community?
Yeah. What's interesting about the Tony Robbins world was that, and I don't think I've ever told this story on a podcast, but I was hosting an event at the same venue that Tony's UPW was going to be at. And I really didn't know his work well at the time, but the woman had said, hey, because we're working together and I was bringing a conference there, she goes, if you want a couple tickets to go and see Tony, I can give you some tickets. And so I did. I went and saw Tony, and then I walked on fire and got rid of my limiting beliefs and walked out of there feeling like, holy shit, what just happened? And it was incredible. It was remarkable. What he was able to craft in a course of 3 or 4 days was something I'd never experienced. And next level type things for me at that moment of my life. I was so impressed. And so I went all in. I remember I was in my mid 20s and Tony so this is his weekend conference. Tickets are probably $500 to $1,000, whatever it is, but he was selling his mastery course. I had never been in an audience where anybody sold anything for high ticket, never in my life. Right. Yeah. And he goes, you can come to all 3 events for $10,000. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, what? People, what? And I remember
that number just seemed like astronomical.
That was like,
to you.
You could have said 7 million. You could have said 7 million. But what was also incredible, John, was I can think back to that moment about the internal dialogue and the wrestling match between my I'm not worth it and what if I am. Dude, I remember being in the room having this, am I worth it? Is that crazy? And then I making the decision to invest in myself.
So you did it.
Hard to argue whether or not that or Tony was more impactful in my life, but it's likely again, both.
I always say interrelated to one another. I mean, at that point, you'd been quite successful with Cutco.
Yes.
So it doesn't, now looking back on it, to me, it doesn't seem like that much of a leap that you would do that, but I can totally relate to.
Dude, in the moment, it was a huge leap.
In your mind, right? And you're thinking, if I tell my parents, what are they going to think?
Yeah.
You're spending $10,000 to join a bunch of Tony Robbins?
I did tell somebody, and their first reaction is, "Oh my God, dude, you got suckered. You got to get your money back."
Yeah.
I did receive that.
Yeah.
And thank God I stayed the path. I knew what I knew, and that was the beginning of what was a really cool journey in that world, and definitely changed the course of my life.
And you even got to the point where you were in leadership. Explain what that was.
Yeah. So when you go to all the events, I went to all the events.
You're promoted
multiple times. Yeah. And then they asked, look, now that you've learned this, would you like to teach this? So I went through their leadership academy, and then you can be selected to attend events as a leader where now you're helping other people go through the material. Now you're helping other people to have their transformation, their breakthrough. Now we're behind the scenes with Tony, right? Looking at people's intake forms, asking how we can support people, working together to create a magical experience for people. So one thing Tony's done really well is he's involved other people in helping to make the impact. He is a genius, no question about it. He also has enrolled hundreds of geniuses around him that want to serve. And these people are people that have wild success in their life, who are showing up to give back to this community. And so that particular group of senior leaders was part of what, we'd come in early, we'd stay late for these events, and it was really wild.
Yeah. I mean, I know Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce, has credited Tony Robbins with helping encourage him to start Salesforce. And there's a lot of people, I'm here in San Francisco, there's a lot of people, business leaders that, that are big fans of the work that he does.
Dude, he's in so many ways, he's larger than life. But I also want to say this too, that as you move down the path and you and you think more globally, or you think about other people and other influences, I've realized that it was actually a little unhealthy how attached I was to Tony and that organization. And there's lots of amazing people with lots of different philosophies, different approaches to life. And at one point I knew I needed to reach out and to expand and have other things to say other than this is what Tony teaches, or this is what I learned at Tony. I wanted to expand that network. And so that was an important part of the journey too.
Yeah. Yeah. So you at some point decide that you're going to kind of tear up the path that you're on, and you decide to start what became Front Row Global, and at the same time a nonprofit. And you had a new child. So what happened there?
Yeah, this particular part of my life was I think I had a level of certainty. As I was getting clear about, and Tony taught this, these human needs that we have. We have a need for certainty. We have a need for uncertainty. We have a need for significance. And this is one that hit me, where our need for significance of making a difference in the world, that's the one that I hadn't dialed in. So I started a charity called Front Row Foundation, which helps kids and adults who have a life-threatening illness see the live event of their dreams from the front row. It was all the things that was me and my DNA, right? It's like loved live events, loved being in this idea of being in the front row of life. And I thought, what if we could help people who are battling for their life, kind of like a Make-A-Wish, but for kids and adults of all ages. And we just focus on concerts, sporting events, like that's our focus. And then what we could do is we could take everything that we're learning from people who are fighting for their life, about how they're living their life, and teach that to others. Saw this whole thing in my head. That translated into raising millions of dollars, doing that charity for now almost 20 years. And that became a book called The Front Row Factor. And then I started giving speeches about it. And that was a decade of my life. And that's an important decade of my life. And I'm so proud of it. But the part that I think is most important to the audience today, based on how you teed this up in the beginning also, is for fathers. One of my kids was 6, the other was 1. I had hit what I would call the pinnacle of my speaking career, where I had landed a $35,000 keynote speech. So $35K for 1 hour.
Wow.
That I thought I was right. I'd arrived. This was kind of the top of where I thought I was going to get in the speaking game. And the truth is that right when I got there, I realized I didn't want to do it anymore because I was a businessman who happened to have a family, and I wanted to be a family man who happened to have a business. My priorities were all jacked up. It was always one more season. It was always like, well, now that I'm getting 10K a speech, how do I say no? And now that I got 20K a speech, how do I say no? And it was always one more thing. It was like, I got to get this book written and get it out there. And I remember saying this to my wife all the time, got to do this thing with the charity, got to hire an executive director, and it was just constantly like this selling myself on why more was better for the family. It was selling myself on why more was better for the world. I was showing my kids how to work hard. I could sell myself all day long. But the point is that I was still becoming a guy who was not present with his family, who was not at home with his kids, was not showing up in the way that I knew. And I knew enough to know it was happening. And when you have a 6-year-old, you're 1/3 of the way to 18. So I don't have many more seasons that I get to sell myself on why going to work is so great. And when you got the young kids too, sometimes I hit at work. Sometimes it's like, oh, I got to go to the office. But the truth is, it's like, I'm the boss there. I'm the king there, right? I was so in control there. I could be in a coffee shop working on my vision. And I didn't have to be dealing with the tough parts of being a dad, right? The screaming kid who doesn't care that you're, right? He doesn't report to you. You can't fire him, right? Like it's not that way. So that's when I got 30 guys together in Philadelphia in 2016. And I said, the only rule, guys, is to not talk about our businesses. And these are really successful guys. Jon Vroman's there, Hal Elrod's there, a bunch of other guys with lots of success, lots of money, lots of fame. But the truth is we weren't talking about family like we really should have, could have, wanted to. And so we did 3 days, no business talk. And all the guys were like, oh my God, we need more of this. We need accountability in our lives. We need space. We need permission to talk about these things, because we're not having these conversations even when we're getting together. You know, it quickly slips into business. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to look at a buddy and be like, how's your sex life? There's just no good time to talk about that. But if you create a safe place for men to be vulnerable and open and real with each other, and that's what's called in, that's what's asked of them, they'll step up. They'll open up, they'll share. And they're like, holy, I've been carrying that around for 10 years, or I had a conversation on a Front Row Dads retreat that I haven't had with my best friends in 10 years. We went so deep, so fast because we ask that of them. We set it up in a way where they can do that. And it's awesome. And now 7 years later, we have hundreds of men in the group. We have created some good systems. And ultimately the whole goal is, all of it's important, John, as you know, like we want guys to succeed in business. We want guys to love their business. We want guys to go all in on their business in seasons of their life. We also want guys to be really healthy. We want them to have great marriages. We want them to have good relationships with their kids. And doing all these things well, that's why we exist. Because primarily, a lot of groups, even the business groups, are like family matters. But in our group, it's got to be like everything in the family gets built first, then family. So when we build calendars, we build family first, then we build a business around it to support the family. Not like I built a business and then, oh shit, how am I going to fit my family in here?
Yeah. Now, thank you for that. I know because I've been through this evolution a couple of times before where my business was a model that I didn't want to pursue. I was a practicing attorney for a bunch of years. I had young kids. I knew I didn't want to be on the weekends preparing for a trial that starts on Monday and missing out on family. But from that to where I am today was a long journey. And even though I'm sure for you, you said, I've got these $35,000 keynote speeches, but getting to where you are today is a journey. So how did you go about doing that? I mean, 30 guys in Philadelphia is awesome, but it's also, I know, having done events also, that it can be hard to turn that into enough revenue that allows you to quit the day job that you had.
Yeah, you're totally right, man. I haven't done it very well. I've been very smooth over the years, kind of a burn the boats kind of guy. I mean, when I left Cutco and I went out to become a speaker, there were some really tough days. Like we went in debt. I was really stressed out. I was drinking too much. I wasn't exercising. Like it was a disaster. And then transitioning out of speaking and into Front Row Dads was a little less tumultuous as it was that first time around. Because I had a pretty solid income with speaking and I did kind of land the plane a little slowly around speaking and I ramped up the Front Row Dads. But
better way to go.
At some point you have to go all in. And what was really wild is that when you look around for the gifts, the universe will provide them. It was right at the beginning of 2020 when I made the decision to go all in on Front Row Dads. It was just perfect. I was already landing the plane in 2019 and then the world was like, yep, you're not going to do any speaking.
Yeah, good thing you made that decision.
Yeah, dude, it's so divine. The timing was perfect.
It's funny. I mean, that kind of parallels similar to my experience because it was probably around 2018, 2019 where we were doing more small group events around the country. And I was saying to my business partner, I had 3-4 kids at that point. It's like, I do not want to have to get on a plane to make money. Totally. And so we were already in that evolution. And then, pandemic accelerated everything or decelerated everything, depending on your business model.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And then, so it started with a live event, but now it has so much more to it. So tell people about what Front Row Dads entails today.
Yeah. Front Row Dads is a community that welcomes men who want to put family first, the entrepreneurs, business owners that join your business mastermind, grow your business, make millions. Super happy for you. And get around a group of guys who are willing to put family first and have the difficult conversations around how do you connect with your kids? How do you strengthen your marriage with your spouse? How do you even think about the wealth that you've created and how you set up family foundations? And how do you not raise spoiled kids? Because money is not always a gift to your children. So it could really be devastating if it's not handled properly. You can really create soft and weak children if you give them too much and don't set it up properly. So there's all these conversations that we want to have as a community, including emotional intelligence, which is one that a lot of groups don't cover, but we want to talk about trauma we faced as children, trauma that we are facing with our kids, and really addressing those things and healing generational trauma. Which, by the way, I've got a great story on that if we have time. Something that happened recently that I feel like I broke a cycle, which was really powerful.
Yeah, go for it.
You want to hear the story?
Yeah.
So this is really, I think I've shared this one time prior, John. So Here's the story. I'm 8 years old. I live in Pennsylvania. My dad's in the Navy, walks in the door every single night at 7 p.m. on the nose. Like at 6:59, if you stood by the door, the garage door would go up. That's how disciplined my dad was, how consistent he was. And he'd walk in the door in his military uniform, Navy captain, and carrying his briefcase, set it in the exact same spot, sit down for dinner at the exact same time. Like that was our home life. Well, this time I decided I was going to crawl underneath his desk. And when he came through the door, I was going to jump out and I was going to surprise him. Well, after a long day of doing whatever he did at work, he did not find that funny. And he got very angry at me. And I would have told you that I knew that made me sad, but I kind of got over it. Right. And really what that meant was I think I got great at stuffing it down, not really dealing with it until I was in a therapy session one time, a somatic healer doing some breath work. And she took me back through my life. And I got to this moment where I started telling the story. And John, I started bawling, like my body was shaking and I was bawling. And I actually surprised myself because I was thinking, where is this coming from? Like I would have never sat down and told you that I had a lot of trauma around this, or this was unresolved, or I hated my dad because of it. None of that. But because she tapped into something in me that was deeper than I ever knew existed there. This is the blind spot work we do in Front Row Dads a lot of times. That came out. And I felt like, I always just call bullshit on this. People are like, release the trauma. And I'm like, whatever, like it just sounded like something that they had to say to justify the payment they made to the therapist or whatever.
Yeah.
But I released something that day. And here's where I saw it show up. I'm in Cabo a couple of weeks ago with one of our Front Row Dad brothers, and where our families are, hanging out together. And I'm down on the beach by myself and I've got my earphones in. I'm listening to some meditation music and I got my hands in the sand and I'm like floating in the clouds in meditation, right? I'm super quiet and serene. And my 8-year-old sneaks up behind me and he grabs me and tries to scare me. Now, I did not react. I did react, but I turned around, smiled, hugged him and pulled him in. And I realized, John, that I'm 48, like I said earlier. And for as long as I can remember, if anybody ever scared me, I would be very close to punching you in your face. Like if you jump out and scare me, I immediately get angry, turn around and want to punch you in your face. And I don't know where that came from. I used to laugh with my wife. I was like, don't scare me because I immediately get angry and I don't know why, but that's just part of who I am.
You hadn't connected it back to that story, really.
But and I'm guessing, but I think this is what happened that was living in my body at a deep core level. And I was able to process it and release it. And now my son comes up, scares me. If I wouldn't have done the work as a man, I would have freaked out on him. And now he's got the same story and would have carried the same trauma and would have lived my life, because that's what we do when we pass on trauma. But because I worked on healing myself and dealing with my stuff, I now was able to break that cycle. My son surprises me and I embrace him and hug him. That does not make me better than my father. That makes me doing that. That is what I should be doing as a man, which is healing and working to make the next generation a little better than the last. And that's what my dad did, because his dad was even tougher than he was. And he said, I worked on that. And I think I gave to you a more healed version of my father. And now you're working on it. And you're going to be better to your kids than I was to you. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to pass along information, help each other out, heal wounds, right? That's what happens. And so I share that because that's really what Front Row Dads is a place for men to have the conversation they're not normally having and to reveal blind spots. So here's the thing. Sometimes you don't even know why you're joining Front Row Dads as a community. You just know you want to be the best that you can be as a father, husband, businessman. And what you recognize, if you're humble enough to recognize it, is that there are things you don't even know. Because there's the shit you need to work on, John, that you already know. You're like, I know I yell at my kids. I need to get better at that. But that's not what you get out of Front Row Dads. What you typically get out of Front Row Dads is you didn't even know this. And now being around all these other men, you were able to see it when you couldn't see it before. Because we are built to thrive in relationship and community. That's what we're meant to do. We're not meant to be sitting at home on our computers, digesting content all day long. That's part of it. Wonderful. Consume some content, this content, that content. I love content in a particular ratio in my life. But what I really need is people around me. So whether it's Front Row Dads or any other community, that's what we got to keep doing. That actually, and I'm going to just zoom out for a quick second. that actually is what I think is the biggest answer to the world's greatest problems is better and better and better local communities. That's it. I think that's the answer for a lot of our biggest problems is local community. If we can strengthen the relationships of human beings at home and with their neighbors and in their cities and states, I think that's a huge step forward in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, Jon. Thanks for sharing that story. I want to wrap up with a question I always ask. I call this my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who've helped you along the way in your journey, especially peers, contemporaries, some of those guys I'm sure you mentioned who were there in Philadelphia with you. Who would you want to shout out and acknowledge for helping you?
Yeah. Do I have to pick one?
You can pick as many as you like. The music may play you off.
There's a couple core guys that I really want to honor, one of which is, John Kane, this guy who was my boss at Cutco. He saw something in me, and I learned from him more than anybody of how to spot the talent of an individual. I watched him do it. I watched him see the good in everybody. I watched him pick up my boys, hold them in his arms, put his hand on their chest and say, I see a light in you. There is something about you. And that's what he does for everybody. He sees the best in everybody around him. And then he brings that out and he brings it into the community and into the team and into the business and into the family. Like he sees people at their best, and he understands that we're all fallible humans too. So he's got a lot of forgiveness. I love that guy. John Berghoff, one of my best friends, he also in this core group of people, he's former Cutco, brilliant human. I think one of the things I love about John is John has really helped. He's always believed in me and my potential. And he's always believed in Front Row Dads, and he believed in Front Row Foundation. And he always has been there building with me. And I really want to honor him for building together. He was the guy who would show up with a hammer and be like, let's go. What do you want to build? Right. And it was like just so fun to create with him. And then Hal Elrod, who, best friend for a long time, this guy, man, he's just so excited about everything. Like genuinely, he'll pitch something and you're like, dude, when did you become an affiliate for that product? He's like, I'm not, I'm just so excited about it. and that's how he rolls. Like he just so authentic, so enthusiastic. And he has brought so many people to Front Row Dads because he talks about it so often. And all these people, man, and I could go on and on and on, but those are a couple names that come to mind that I just love and appreciate and have been supportive. And again, list goes on. Justin Donald and all these people who just keep showing up, and they keep asking me they keep asking me who I am and how that will be applied in the world in their own unique ways. But that's what they do. They keep challenging me to bring Jon to the table and to be that as much as I can. That's what they give space to. That's what they call in. So thanks for letting me talk about some of my favorite people. Of
course, Jon. This has been a pleasure. You got the Front Row Dads podcast. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with the community?
Yeah, man. Calling all the dads out there, frontrowdads.com. Start with the podcast, see how it feels. And then, if you really want to go all in, do everything you can for your family, then say yes to the brotherhood and pour into it, because if you give to these guys, they'll give to you. And that's what it's all about, man. It's, we get this one chance. My buddy, Jim Shields has the best line. He says 18 summers, you get 18 summers, and it starts to feel different when you're like, what are we going to do this summer? This is summer number 12 or 13 or whatever it is. And you only got 18 of these. So, in theory, yeah.
He's another one I interviewed on the podcast. I love that conversation. And a couple of days ago, I mentioned the name of his business, 18 Summers, and why he named his business 18 Summers. And every time, it's kind of like your, family men with businesses, when you say it to the right person, they're like, shiver goes down their spine, right?
I get it. He was at our first retreat. He was in Philly in 2016. Jim Shields was there.
Wow, that's great. Jon, thanks so much.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.